Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. I'm Michael Jackson of the Game Before the Money. With me, as always, former NFL executive Upton Bell, director of player personnel for the Colts, general manager for the New England Patriots, and World Football League owner of the Charlotte Hornets. Well, we're going to jump right on to immediate NFL news and the schedule announcement of the league starting its season on Wednesday, and then Thursday, a 10 a.m. U.S. time start in Australia. Now we had kind of alluded to how the NFL was looking to grow internationally and what they were willing to do to achieve that. Upton, that's kind of like, it's almost like they listened to our podcast and were like, hey, well, let's do this Australian thing.
Well, the interesting thing is, and correction for our listeners, is that the poor players are going to have to get up and play at 10:30 a.m. so it can be shown here in America. I think it's a 17-hour difference at like 7:30, 8:30 at night.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Yeah, my bad. My bad. Yep.
but think about this. And I was watching ESPN this morning about it, and ex NFL players were asked on the panel, what do they think about that? And back to what we had talked about a couple of weeks ago, is basically who's considering the players. I mean, I think it's great to spread the word, to spread the NFL all over the world, make it a solid number two behind soccer, maybe someday number one. But what about the poor bastards that have to play the games at 10:30 in the morning? Imagine what this does to your schedule. It's hard enough to get ready to play for night games where you have to sit around all day long. And I've been through that, so I know what it's like. And it can be nerve-wracking, particularly if you're going to the Super Bowl. But now think about it. I mean, you're going to have to get up essentially at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning and start getting ready to play a game at 10:30 in the morning. I mean, that's unbelievable. Why? To play a game in Australia, I can understand to a degree what the NFL is trying to do, but put yourself in the body of a player or a coach, but particularly a player. You fly. I've got my grandson is flying to Australia to live there for a while, and the trip there is what 10, 12 hours, something like that. And think about that. How many weeks or a week or days ahead of time do you have to get there to get acclimated, to understand the heat of Australia, and then to play at 10 o'clock in the morning? Who the hell cares about the players? That's the attitude I get.
Well, and we even, a popular topic um, for baseball is how West Coast travel affects teams on a West Coast trip. And that's within the country. That's within the U.S. And it's pretty well documented, in baseball that travel has a heavy effect on players a lot of times. Now we're talking about international travel for a sport that is much more rough than baseball and takes a lot more out of your body. And you're going to have to travel 10, 12 hours to get there. So, like you said, players, they're not really being represented here. I wouldn't want to do it, but at the same time, it's easy to say, well, they're making millions of dollars per year, which for some of them that's true, but some of them are making a few $100,000 a year, which again is a lot of money, but the toll it takes. And then, if you're playing quarterback and you throw an interception in Australia, it's going to get scrutinized all over the U.S. And how could you blow that game? The tight end was open, and they're going to face that scrutiny too. And the job scope keeps expanding here for NFL teams. And again, like we said last week, the goal is to eventually have each team play at least one game internationally per season. Now that affects us as fans too, because one, if you're a season ticket holder, you're going to lose a game.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
and they're not going to discount the prices. And two, I don't have any information backing this other than personal experience, but my guess is, we're going to have to pay to see the game in Australia on some streaming service, or the game on Wednesday. Chances are, we're going to have to dip into our pockets to watch those games.
Well, we could do a whole show on just the future of all sports. I'm just looking at ESPN now, and they now say ESPN is right across the bottom on the screen. ESPN is now the home of MLB.TV. Stream in the ESPN app. Everything is going to streaming. You're right, it's going to cost us more and more money. When does it become too much? But the feeling of the leagues, and particularly the NFL, which is maybe the most powerful league in the world, or at least number two, is when will the day come where you and I live long enough to see the day when everything will be streaming, where you will have to pay for everything? And it's inching that way, and there's no question that one or two of those games are going to be on. And of course, you have Amazon, where you have to pay to watch every Thursday night to begin with. Netflix is opening up with baseball exclusively last night, the Yankees and the San Francisco Giants. This is where we are heading. Pay more, as you say, games at odd hours. And here's the big thing about playing in Australia, which is what they found when they played in South America a couple of years ago, the Eagles and the Packers, is if you get injured in that game, and now you've got to get on a plane, and you're flying at 30,000 feet, something like that, for 12, 14 hours, what do you think that does to your body, particularly if you're injured?
Well, and, God forbid, but if somebody gets a real serious injury, like a Damar Hamlin kind of injury, a Dennis Byrd kind of injury, wow. I mean, I don't think, I don't know how well the league has thought something like that through. And I hate to bring this up. I don't know how much the Players Association has thought that through.
Well, it brings me to another subject that you and I discussed earlier this week, and that is, according to my sources, it's semi-public now, that basically the NFL is going to the commissioner and the owners are going to push for the 18-game season, which Roger Goodell has not hidden, has come out and said that they and he is in favor of it. But here's the deal, according to sources. The deal is that they think they can get it passed through the Players Association by guaranteeing that any of the players that don't want to play the 18 games but are willing to play 17 games, that they will have an 18-game season. But basically, if the players decide that they only want to play in 17 games, that is the way that they will get it done.
And, people forget, I'm sure, it's rarely talked about. The NFL, when it instituted the bye week, there used to be 2 bye weeks. Every team
Correct.
used to get 2 bye weeks, and that wasn't a 16 game season. So now players are, they're going to elect, they're going to have the option, it sounds like, potentially to elect their bye week. And I've started to wonder, as the season gets longer, as there are these games, and I'll tell you what, I would, I would choose to travel with the team to Australia and take that as my bye week, maybe. you know, um, but
That's right.
yeah,
Except for one thing, that you know what the league is going to say. The league is going to say, "This is a big international game. Get your ass on the plane and go."
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. No free Paris trip. You're gonna play in the Paris game, but I've started to wonder in the past year or two, is pro football going to become a little bit like Major League Baseball, where you're going to have two starting quarterbacks, like where you have a quarterback rotation, where you're going to have rotations, platoon systems, that sort of thing, just to hold up throughout the season.
well, you know what, Michael, and that's a good thought, because I would say that also on top of all of this, I think you're going to get to the days of where we're now at a 52-man roster. I think the rosters will be expanded, and this is the way you sell it. Here's how I would sell it to the Players Association, which has had much chaos, as we've seen, including allegedly some people stealing money. Here's how I sell it to the Players Association. We are going to guarantee more jobs, which is important to them. And here's what we're going to do: we will expand from 50 to a 53-man roster. We'll expand to 70-man rosters. So what you've done is, yes, you're going to have to pay more players. You'll pay probably many of them, the last 20 or so, the minimum to a degree. And then you say to the Players Association, we're creating more jobs. Now, I do believe, I won't be around for it, but I do believe if the NFL continues to be the number one sport, or number one or number two sport in the world, that the day will come when you're going to need expanded rosters. Why? Because the injury rate keeps going up. The interesting thing, and I know I'm repetitive about this with you every time we talk. My first year going to a training camp other than my father's 1946 of the Chicago Bears, the average player's life was around 3, maybe 3.5 years. And with all the medical advances, with all the specialization, it hasn't changed. It's still the same. So when you think about that, is the attrition rate is it going to continue to go up, or is it going to go down? Where is it going to be? Well, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, you add more players.
Well, and you know what they say, NFL stands for not for long. So, um, we're in an age where, players start playing the game earlier. And college football is basically pro football. Now that players are getting paid, I mean,
Correct.
there was one guy who made $4 million last year. I'll tell you what, if I made $4 million in college, I would say thank you, NFL. I appreciate you drafting me. However, I'm just going to retire. Period. I'm just...
Please don't draft me. I've got these suckers on the line for another couple of years.
Yeah, that's the thing too. And we can talk about that in another episode about how college football has evolved. But yeah, it's great to talk about how pro football has evolved. And speaking of evolutions, Um, our original topic for today that we planned for before we got this news this morning about the schedule is head coaches and how teams are evolving their strategies. We have 10 new head coaches, including Mike McCarthy coming back into coaching with the Steelers, John Harbaugh moving from the Ravens to the Giants, Kevin Stefanski moving from the Browns to the Falcons, Robert Saleh coming back into the head coaching fold with the Titans. Who stands out to you? What stands out? Of course, Joe Brady taking over for the Bills after they let go of Sean McDermott. What are your thoughts here, Upton? Who do you think upgraded? What do you think here?
I would call it Operation Retread. Have we really have any of them really improved? In fact, I had emailed you earlier in the week about I think a very long column in the Athletic about what happened to all of the African American coaches, many who should have been considered, and not one blip on the screen. Forget the Rooney Rule, forget all the rules that you have there. What is wrong with NFL ownership and management that not 10 positions filled, mostly retreads, and what has happened here? Not one African American coach considered, not one getting a head coaching job, with plenty out there, and the article talked about the feeder system, and why can't or why are not African American coaches promoted more, and why they've cut out some of the opportunities that they had in the past through meetings with owners. Well, that meetings that was set up over a period of time for African American coaches to meet with owners, to mix with owners, to expose themselves. I think that's already gone. So you say to yourself, in every part of America, like it or not, African Americans are getting some, if not more, opportunities. What the hell happened to the NFL? It's ridiculous. It is America's greatest sport. It's the most popular. There are more and more African American coaches around now in assistant positions. But why? What is the problem? And again, let me give you an example. I told somebody this past week, I said, the ghost of Burt Bell is coming back. He used to coach the Steelers, except he was smart enough to know that he wasn't very good as a head coach and quit. I said, Mike McCarthy, what the hell is going on here? I mean, the Rooneys have been known in the past to rarely fire a coach, to make the right decisions from Chuck Noll all the way through. And basically, they go back to Johnny Retread.
Yeah, and this has been, obviously it's been an issue for a very long time, and the NFL historically touts Fritz Pollard in the 1920s as the first African American head coach, and they love waving that flag. The real fact is that, it was for a very short period of time.
Correct.
And then shortly afterwards, blacks were banned from the league. And the next African American head coach was Art Shell in 1989. I mean, that's over 10 years before the Cleveland, or rather after, that's 10 years after, more than 10 years after, the Cleveland Indians hired Frank Robinson, and well after the NBA had black head coaches. There's always been this kind of, and it's been at the quarterback position too. Warren Moon, not drafted into the NFL, playing in Canada. You know, coming back, I always point out. He started his career. He and Earl Campbell came out in the same draft year, and Warren Moon didn't come to the NFL until Earl Campbell's career was just about over. And Warren Moon still retired with the third highest passing yardage in NFL history at the time. And it's been that way with quarterbacks. Now we've gotten over the hump with quarterbacks. But with head coaches, it's still the same thing that it's been since, the late 1980s, early 1990s. Right now we have 3 African-American head coaches, D'Amico Ryans with the Texans, Todd Bowles with the Buccaneers, and they're both successful. And then Aaron Glenn with the Jets.
And you know what? 2 of those 3 could be fired this year.
Well, 3 of those 3 could be fired. Remember, Brian Flores got fired after he went 10-6, right? Yeah. So you don't know.
Well, you don't know, but I do want to point out, for me, not a good story, and I think I've told you this before, but to expose our audience to it, we won the Super Bowl in 1970, beat Dallas in the last 30 seconds, and yet about a month later, I was then made a deal with the Patriots to come as their general manager. In the meantime, the Colts insisted that I run the drafts for the Colts. And so I had been scouting all the quarterbacks that year. And if you remember, that was the year of Jim Plunkett, Archie Manning, and Dan Pastorini. The 4th person on that list I had scouted extensively because I knew we didn't need a quarterback or wouldn't draft one at the Colts. So there was a player called Carl Douglas out of Texas A&I, who was big at that time, 6'2", 6'2 and a half, 215, 220. He was coached by a player that I knew from the Philadelphia Eagles, and his name was Gil Stanky, who was the head coach at Texas A&I. So I had a connection there from the old Philadelphia Eagles when he played in Philly in the 40s. So I made it my point to go by there, I don't know how many times, study their film. And so I convinced, even though I knew Don McCafferty probably didn't like the idea, that we draft Carl Douglas on the 3rd round. And I could kind of feel in the draft room, what the hell are we doing this for? We've got Unitas coming back, and we've got Earl Morrall, and I could kind of feel something. And I always thought, because then after the draft was over, that I went to the Patriots. And I always thought to myself, well, first of all, if it was Don Shula, I think I could convince Shula this is a guy that we need to keep, even if it's on the taxi squad, because he had such terrific physical ability. Think of a smaller sized Dan Pastorini, Michael. And so when I got to the Patriots and I saw at the end of training camp that they cut him, he then went on to Canada and had a pretty damn good career. But what if that he was given an opportunity like some of the later African-American quarterbacks? I think he could have been one of the best. But he was a guy that came along at the wrong time. How can you say to somebody, it's hard to say today in light of what's happened, and many great African-American quarterbacks, it's hard to say today to a Carl Douglas, wherever he may be, assuming he's alive, Carl, sorry, your time wasn't just the right time. It's like saying, in a much different way, "Oh, sorry, Josh Gibson, you might have been the greatest catcher of all time, but baseball didn't have any blacks." That to this day still makes me feel really bad about the situation.
Well, you say that, and then the first name I think of is Eric Bieniemy in current
Yep,
times. Eric
yep,
Bieniemy would had Eric Bieniemy as a head coaching candidate was a no-brainer, and he ended up going from offensive coordinator from the Chiefs to offensive coordinator to the Washington Commanders. Now, normally a guy like that gets a head coaching shot, and he didn't. Now, we don't know the ins and outs. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but that's one example of where the coaching situation might be similar to where we were with quarterbacks, um, before the 1980s, really, because you think about, James Harris got a shot starting opening day with the Bills in 1969. He played the first half. Marlon Briscoe had a shot with the Broncos before that, but then he got traded to the Bills and ended up playing receiver. Um, Vince Evans. Then we jump ahead. I mean, you got to jump ahead to the mid '70s where James Harris is playing for the Rams and Vince Evans is playing for the Bears. And it's kind of like we might be in that spot with head coaches uh, for the NFL, and everybody made such a the media really loved the story of Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes facing off in the Super Bowl, and the first time that there were two African American quarterbacks uh, starting the Super Bowl for the first time. And I wanted to call up everybody and say, like, well, when are we going to have two African American head coaches? That's going to be your story. It's going to be another 50 years. And I'll close this topic by saying I spoke with Lionel Taylor, the great Lionel Taylor,
yep.
receiver, first receiver to get 100 catches in a season. Um, and he was an assistant for Chuck Noll. People don't know this. He was basically an offensive coordinator for Chuck Noll during those great Steeler years, during the Steel Curtain Steeler years. Um, and he told me he got asked um, in the mid '70s when he thought an African American would be hired as a head coach, because Lionel Taylor ostensibly would have been a head coaching candidate. That's generally what you do. You become a coordinator, you move up the ladder to a head coach. Um, and when Lionel Taylor, he said when he got asked that question, he said, "Oh, it's not going to be for another 20 years." And the reporter that asked the question was a little shocked because, you know, I think he thought it sounded like he expected the answer to be like within 5 years. But Lionel Taylor was pretty darn close getting asked that question in the mid '70s, and it wasn't until 1989 when Art Shell was hired by the Raiders. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
Well, but the bottom line is, I don't think you're going to see a natural progression. I don't. I think that somehow the African American coach is in limbo. That that whatever it is that's going on now, the NFL has. They can point out all they want about Condoleezza Rice showing her in the box and saying she's part of the ownership of the Denver Broncos with the Waltons. That's that's BS. I mean, until you get more African American ownership, and there are African American multimillionaires around. I mean, isn't everybody today a multimillionaire? But until you get that, it's easy to say, Michael, I'm going to entrust um, my quarterback position, playing position, to an African American. Uh, It's harder to say for somebody that owns a football team, multimillionaire, billionaire, to say, "Oh, my new head coach is going to be African American." They treat it like, Jesus, we've overcome cancer. I mean, it's ridiculous what is going on. And of course, you see what happened here with the Patriots, and and with May. I mean, he was their first. Bob Kraft was around saying what a great thing it is that he was a guy who played here for the Patriots. He lasted barely 1 year, fired right after the last game against Buffalo. Now, he probably was not qualified enough to face all the pressure and things that he did. And by the way, sadly, never heard from him again. I don't know. Nobody knows what's happened to his life. But I mean, there was a case of where a guy was not totally prepared yet, and yet he was thrust into a situation and then fired summarily at the end of the last game of the season. And it just gives an example of an owner saying to another owner, "See, this guy didn't work out." So I am kind of negative on this. I think it's going to be years before you see the proliferation of African American coaches in the NFL. Sadly.
Well, and you say we'll close with this because you reminded me when you talked about the Patriots situation and not knowing where he is right now. A couple 3 years ago, when I was working for the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, doing their podcast, I got to chat with Nolan Richardson, the great Arkansas basketball head coach, who led Arkansas to back-to-back national championship games and won a national championship. And he kind of, I'm not going to go into the full story of how he left Arkansas and what happened there, how the coaching position was vacated. But I said, "Coach, what happened after that?" And he basically said that as an African American, he just didn't get a second chance. And this is a guy who won a national championship and then took his team to a second national championship game in back-to-back years. You get someone else with those kind of credentials, and the phone is going to ring from somewhere. So like you said, it's not only the first chance that is difficult to come by, but it's the second chance that might even be
worse,
more difficult to come by.
There's no question, and as you say, we'll end up with this. But there's no question in my mind that we will do a show someday on a chapter of my book called "The South is Burning," and how from 1964, when I first went out on the road for the Colts, all the way through being in the same town, Memphis, the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, is the lessons I learned in the South will stay with me to the rest of my life, of the things that happened there. And I don't care how you state it, I don't think much has changed, unfortunately.
All right. Well, diving in a little bit more into what you referred to as the retreads. I think the headlining member of this year's class is John Harbaugh, going from the Ravens to the Giants. He's got Matt Nagy, former Bears head coach, as his offensive coordinator. What do you think of that change there, going from Brian Daboll, who ended up becoming the Titans offensive coordinator under their new head coach, Robert Saleh, Um, what do you think about is Harbaugh an upgrade for the Giants? Is Jesse Minter,
Any,
the
is that
Charger defensive coordinator, is he an upgrade for the Ravens?
hard to say because what happened? One of the things that I always remember having a discussion with my brother Bert, who at one time was the business manager of the Baltimore Colts. He he reminded me. He said he was when Don Shula was hired. Ironically, my brother picked up Don Shula at the airport. I picked up Chuck Noll. And my brother said to Shula, I remember Shula telling me a couple of times, he said, your brother picked me up at the airport and he said, welcome to Baltimore, John. I give you 7 years. Actually, 7 years is exactly how long Shula lasted in Baltimore. Now, he decided to leave. When I picked up Chuck Noll at the airport, I never said that to Chuck Noll, but I got in a conversation about how important Unitas was in the offense. And his immortal words to me is, remember something, Upton, when you get to the playoffs, it's all about defense, not offense. And of course, Noel was right in many of the biggest games that he played and that we played. But what I see, and the question I have is, when does a head coach eventually become a liability for himself when he's at a place too long? And in the case of Harbaugh, sooner or later the players are going to begin to tune you out, and that is true with most, if not all, coaches. The best coach I've ever seen was Paul Brown, who brought so many different things to the NFL: the 40-yard dash, the IQ test, the film study, the messenger guards, all those things he brought to it. But in the end, his own players turned on him, and that went behind his back to Art Modell, who then Modell fired him. There is a time period for all coaches, and like all of us. And in this case, I wonder with Harbaugh, I just think what happens is players sooner or later, particularly in a sport where, football is a violent sport, is a contact sport, players don't last that long in it, and yet coaches to a degree last longer. But when does the player tune the coach out? I think that's what happened in Baltimore. I don't think it's necessarily Harbaugh's fault, but I have my questions of him going to the Giants. Yes, anything will be better than what the Giants have had for coaches for like the last 10 years. I mean, one disaster after another. But I would say caution there with the Giants. With the Jets, I don't think Glenn has a chance at all. That's my opinion. You can bring in all the ex-offensive coordinators, everything else you want. But his biggest problem, Aaron Glenn's biggest problem, is the owner, Woody Johnson. I personally like him. I met him. He's kind of a lot. He was a lot of fun in the evening I spent with him when he came back to Penn years ago. That doesn't mean he's a terrific owner. The coach is tied to the owner, and then the players are tied to the coach. So in my thing, I think Harbaugh has a better chance with the Giants because I think they have better talent, and if that idiot quarterback ever really grows up, I think he could be very, very good. But I don't hold out a lot of hope for either one of them. But name any of the head coaching positions that were just filled, 10 of them. Is there anybody there that you say, Michael Jackson, wow, that guy is a can't miss? I don't think so.
Not a single one. I agree with you. I watched the Green Bay Packers for 40 years now. And McCarthy I think went through the same issue that you said that Harbaugh may have gone through. I think when the Packers won the Super Bowl in the 2010 season, that team was highly committed and everybody was bought in. I think by the time his tenure ended and he was fired, I think most, if not all, the team had pretty much tuned him out. Um, is that McCarthy's fault? I don't know. I mean, it's an evolution. You know, there were only a handful of players left. I still think Aaron Rodgers was committed to the cause. I still think Clay Matthews was committed to the cause. But, you know, I don't know if McCarthy, and I wasn't inside the locker room, but it didn't seem, over the years, it didn't seem like the team was as bought in and committed that they had been previously. Now, can he get the Steelers on board? I don't know. I think he was able to get the Cowboys on board for a time. I also think, you know, I live in Texas, and you know, I told my neighbor when the Cowboys hired McCarthy, I was like, look, you guys are going to win division championships. As far as the playoffs go, I don't know, because there are coaches who seem to do exceptionally well during the regular season, and they're consistently good in the regular season. Sean McDermott might be another guy. Marty Schottenheimer, another guy. They have stunning regular season records. But the playoff record didn't match that for one reason or another. Sometimes it's, you know, I mean, look, do we, you know, Marty Schottenheimer going up against the Tom Brady Patriots and the John Elway Broncos? I mean, is that his fault?
No.
No.
No. No.
It, you know, and then you have Sean McDermott, you know, in the golden era of Patrick Mahomes, knocking him down. I'm curious as to what Joe Brady is going to do with the Bills. I think that's the most interesting hire here because the Bills promoted from within, and they're the only team that did that. And I'm curious to see how that comes out. You know, the Browns in the 60s promoting Blanton Collier from within. The Colts, was McCafferty promoted from within?
He was, and he was a disaster.
Well, but he won the Super Bowl.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, anybody can win a game. I mean, which brings us to this talking about second chances. Who's the only coach that essentially left one team for another and won back-to-back Super Bowls and continued even to the very end? The year that he either resigned or got fired, still had a winning record. Who's that only coach in history that we know that went on, putting aside Paul Brown, because he was really the owner of the Bengals when the leagues merged. But who's the only coach in history that I can think of at this present moment that went on to a successful second career?
Well, I think you're thinking of Don Shula.
Absolutely. Is there anybody else?
Well, Andy Reid, you know, he went to 5 straight NFC Championship games. He didn't win a Super Bowl in Philadelphia. He went to 1 Super Bowl in Philadelphia. So, you know, he could maybe fit into that category. The point is, as Bum Phillips would always say about Earl Campbell, I don't know if he's in a class by himself, but it doesn't take long to call roll at that class. So, yeah, you know, Don Shula and Andy Reid, wow, yeah. You know, it's a small group. It's a small group, and there might be. Dan Reeves took the Broncos to several Super Bowls, and then he took the Falcons um, to a Super Bowl. Um,
And then he made a mistake going to the Giants.
yeah, so there's but like we said, it doesn't take long to call roll. Marty Schottenheimer was successful with two different teams, but couldn't get into the Super Bowl. Um, but yeah, I think the Bills hire is the most interesting because they hired from within.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why they. Did you ever watch any of the press conferences, particularly the last couple ones of that psycho owner of the Buffalo Bills, walking into the locker room, and then after they basically, I thought the Bills beat Denver. I thought that catch was good, but that be as it may, uh, his reason for getting rid of the head coach was he said he walked into the locker room and saw how depressed his team was. Well, for Christ's sake, walk into any locker room after you lose a big game like that, and your players are going to be depressed and down. So that was his reason for getting rid of his coach. And then I watched that press conference and I said, get out the steel balls for this guy. Let him from McCain Mutiny court martial. Let this guy go on and on and on. And I'm very suspect about them on what they did and their excuses for getting rid of their coach. Uh, I didn't think much of Sean McDermott. No, I'm sorry. I thought he was a pretty good coach. I didn't think he was a great coach. They couldn't get over the hump. But that's also on that general manager who didn't do a good job drafting either to surround maybe the second best or the best quarterback that's never won a Super Bowl. So there are more ifs and buts with that. But I'm negative on Buffalo and what they did, and did they improve anything, or did they hire their assistant coach because he would go along with the program? I think that remains to be seen.
Well, I've been critical of Sean McDermott in terms of game decisions, going for two, going on fourth down. We talked about I think in one of our first shows, when I pointed out, he basically brought the division title down to one play when he went for 2 points against the Eagles at the end of the game and failed and lost not only the game, but that cemented the division title for the Patriots and ensured that the Bills would be playing on the road during the playoffs. I don't, judging by your observation, I don't know if that's the reason why he lost his job, but if I were to replace Sean McDermott, that's why I would replace him. But, as much as I am not in favor of McDermott and Matt LaFleur for that matter, I think it's pretty clear, anybody who's been around me the last few years, to know that I think Matt LaFleur is quite mediocre at best. I always think just to finish this up quick, I always think back to the Chargers firing Marty Schottenheimer after he went 14-2 because he couldn't beat the Patriots. And in retrospect, that looks like just an awful, horrible decision because the Chargers plummeted. They let go of Drew Brees shortly afterwards. And, it took the Chargers a long time to climb out of that hole, and they still haven't been to the Super Bowl since. I don't think they've been to the AFC Championship game since.
No, they haven't. But to me, going back to the Bills, you have the Superman Josh Allen, and basically I would have hired an offensive coordinator, not a defensive coach, to begin with. But since they went with that,
Well,
But
actually, Brady was their offensive coordinator, I believe.
he was, but he's not the head coach, and the head coach sets kind of the precedent for the team for that year for how many seasons it is. And there's a big difference to me between the offensive coordinator, because let's see how many offensive coordinators really went on to be really great head coaches. I don't think that many. So whether Brady was or not, if if the owner felt like they needed an offensive coordinator, why the hell didn't he do it years ago? What if he was dissatisfied with the head coach McDermott, then he should have done that. Maybe after the biggest mistake I thought made by McDermott is in that classic game that Peter King called me about, the Kansas City Buffalo game that went into overtime only because Buffalo really screwed it up on the kickoff. Is that would have been the perfect time then to just fire the guy or whatever you were going to do, but they did not do it. It was one of the dumbest calls I've seen, and basically, and giving Kansas City a chance to get back in the game and tie, go into overtime and win it, in the greatest game I've ever seen. But we're back to, you're only as good as your owner, particularly today where the owner is much more in the limelight, much more in the position of thinking that because there's no she's, he runs everything. And that's where the whole thing is. If the owner doesn't know or is not smart enough to pick, at least for the time being, the right coach, you're screwed all the way down the line no matter what you do.
All right. Well, we're going to delve in a little bit more into the coaching changes, as the off season progresses, as the season starts. And we're going to delve into probably next week the evolving role of the general manager these days, because that's a part of this, that's a piece to this puzzle as well. But
should we call it the no power, the no power show?
The no power GM show.
Yeah.
It could be. It could be. So, but until next week, everybody have a great week and enjoy your week and enjoy the start of baseball. I love baseball. It helps hold me over for football, and I hope you enjoy it.
Don't forget the NBA playoffs.
NBA playoffs, and of course,
Wembyana is the greatest athlete to ever play basketball.
And of course, March Madness, which I've enjoyed so far. And it's Thursday, so that gets underway again today with the Sweet 16. So until next week, everybody, thanks for listening to Unvarnished Football. Please visit uptonbell.com. Please visit unvarnishedfootball.com. And also remember, you can visit thegamebeforethemoney.com. All right, till next week, everyone. Thank you.